when we speak also about sustainability, I also take it two ways. If I consider sustainability, then I have access to wider market. And if I don't consider it, then there are markets that I exclude. For example, I would say the European market is tightening the environmental standards like year after year.
Tejarah Talks.
Hello everyone, I'm Mohab Al Hinai, VP Sustainability and Circular Economy at the Oman Environmental Services Holding Company, BIA. Welcome to Tejarah Talks. Today we're joined by Dr. Aisha Al Sarihi, Economic Expert at the Ministry of Economy, and Hanife Ymer, ESG Adviser at the Development Bank. Thank you both for joining us. Today we'll talk about ESG. You know, these three letters, when we hear these three letters, ESG, what do they mean? You know, and maybe I'll start with you, Hanife, if you can tell us in plain English what they mean.
Okay, so I mean, we can define ESG first for everyone. So the E obviously is the one that people gravitate to the most because it's the most tangible. It's about the environment. It's about, you know, the health of soils, biodiversity, it's energy waste, it's about emissions. The S is around social impact. So it's really focused most on people. So what are we doing for communities and societies? How are we giving back? How are we supporting local employment? And then governance is kind of the overarching piece. It's how an organisation is run. You know, what are the rules? What are the procedures? What is the board set up? And how does the board give oversight to the organisation, and how are the decisions made, and how are they transparent? So that's in a nutshell what the E and the S and the G mean. But let's look at it in a different way. For me, I always say to people, ESG is simplistically a risk and opportunity lens that you apply to your business. Businesses across Oman are already looking at risk and opportunity. ESG is often seen as the early warning system for financial risk. It captures issues before they appear, and things like costs, fines, lost contracts. So think of it as an early warning system, but it's an important piece of business, definitely.
That's great. So if you move to you, Aisha, you know, at the Ministry of Economy, how do you guys view ESG in terms of from a policymaker's perspective?
Yes, for us, like ESG, it can be read from governance perspective, is bringing the balance between the governance as well as the environmental and the sustainability, as well as the social protection. And indeed, in Oman, Vision 2040 actually brings these three elements together in the vision document. We have a pillar for the governance, and then the other pillar for the development, and the other one is for the social. So in a way, we are naturally, as a government in Oman, we are having that framework that guide us towards the ESG implementation. And the way we are trying also to bring it in our the ministry, policies and plans, we actually work on. We just integrated the low carbon economy into the Oman 5-year plan, 11th 5-year plan. So we do work on a green economy project. We work on circular economy project, and we are trying to help the different entities in Oman to move really from the concept but to the implementation. And the good news, like in Oman, like different entities, like they have the enthusiasm towards the ESG, the knowledge and the awareness, and they come to us when they hear like we are working on those subjects. So I think we are naturally moving towards that direction.
Great. You mentioned circular economy. I'll hold that thought. I'll come back to you on that. But maybe if you look from a global perspective, 2024 was the highest recorded year on record, 1.55 degrees Celsius pre-industrial level. So what should businesses look out for? I mean, is this an operational risk, financial risk, or both? What do you think, Hanife?
It's all of the above. Okay. So often businesses will think, temperatures are going up. It's a bit removed from me. It doesn't really impact me. But again, if you think about the risk, and one thing I will say about often people talk about the physical impacts of climate change, climatic events, and we know that Oman is susceptible to cyclonic activity and that's increasing. There are statistics around that. And I think we did some work where the total cost of cyclones in Oman were, over 270 odd million in terms of costs USD. So, it does have a real impact. But one thing to note is these climate events are happening a lot more frequently. So remember when I first started in ESG, the time horizon for doing an ESG risk profiling was, 20, 30, 40 years out. Well, that's shrunk. So now, again, if businesses think they're not impacted, I think you need to rethink your thinking on that because the time horizons have now become a lot more condensed. We're seeing, if you just look at the world today, you've got freezing temperatures in the US, you've got floods and fires in Australia. Where, the news reports now are all about the weather events that are happening globally. So I think if you're not thinking about this in a business, no matter how big or small, I think you open yourself up to impacts that you may not be able to manage. So the other thing too with Oman, you've got increasing temperatures, but one of the other things that is impacting not just Oman but the region is increases in humidity. And what happens when you have increased humidity is your assets, your machinery, your production process don't work as efficiently. If they don't work as efficiently, you're probably using more energy. What does that mean? More costs. So again, you've got to play out some of these risks and see what the real impacts are to your business. Your workers can't stay outside if you've got increased humidity. And we know the UAE last year recorded, I think it was 5 days of 100% humidity. You cannot have people outside under those conditions. So what does the workforce look like in the future when you've got temperatures that are elevated or you have humidity levels that are elevated? So I think these are things you really need to think about. Are your assets in your business resilient enough to some of these changing conditions? And not only that, you've got to also remember that investors are not going to be buying or investing in products or assets that are not going to be able to respond to these increasing sort of climatic events or issues or impacts in the future. If I'm an investor, I don't want to buy an old, rusty, inefficient asset. I want something that's going to be efficient, effective and resilient for future conditions. So I think it's really important that Omani businesses actually understand it's not just what's happening today that could impact your business, but it's also your value, the value of your assets, the value of your business going forward. Is it at risk in the future?
Yeah, that's going to lead me to my follow-up question. I know we've been speaking before the podcast and you serve on multiple boards. Which ESG risk you think companies most ignore until it becomes very expensive?
Oh, God. I think everyone finds the E bucket the easiest because it is easy to grab, quantify, measure, systemize and operationalize. I think governance is not done as well. And I'll be honest, I think in this region it still needs a lot of work. I sit on a regional board, so I understand.
So you're saying the G is the one that's...
And you've got to remember, where did ESG come from? ESG as a term came from the investor community. I mean, up until then, and up until the investors waking up about the risks associated with sustainability, we all refer to it as sustainability.
Yeah.
And the reason why investors came up with the term ESG is because governance is actually something they look at very, very strongly. Their view is if you have the right board, you have the right management team, you've got the right succession planning, the rest should take care of itself. I tend to agree with you. Yeah.
I think if the G, people focus on the G, and then everything would fall into place.
The one thing I just want to add on that is so when governance is done well, there's still one gap, I think, and that's governance of ESG or of sustainability. So often we don't see that properly managed. It still sits, when you ask an organisation where's the highest accountability for sustainability risk or opportunities in your business? Oh, it's with our marketing team where our ESG person sits. No, it actually has to come up to a board. And so we don't see those reporting lines and those levels of accountability and transparency around ESG. So that's something that's very easy to fix. And it's something I don't think is very well managed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from, BIA, the company I work for, is one of OIA's, portfolio companies. And OIA has mandated disclosure of ESG to all its, companies. And obviously, I want to move back to you, Aisha. Now you mentioned circular economy. One of the pillars of our ESG guidelines that are coming from the Oman Investment Authority is our circular economy metrics. So I know at the ministry you're working on a Omani circular economy. So how does that fit within the national ESG drive?
Yes. So with the national ESG, there's the environmental, pillar of it. So in Oman, we do have different ambitions, including targets, including the Oman commitment to net zero. And circular economy is actually contribute to the reducing of the greenhouse gas emissions. Globally, there are studies that show that circular economy could reduce around 39% of global greenhouse gas emissions if it is fully implemented. And we hope that in Oman, it also could contribute to our net zero target. So that is why in the Ministry of the Economy, we worked on the Circular Economy project last year to put a baseline for the Oman circularity gap, to measure the Oman circularity gap, but also to think about the policies and the interventions that could help on accelerating the implementation of circular economy initiatives in the country, whether at the government level, but also at the private sector level, and also in supporting the small, medium enterprises, and also mobilizing the finance towards that direction. So in a way, it also contributes to bringing the balance, the balance between the economic growth and the environment. This is something that is embedded in Oman economic planning since the 1970s, really, until today. But we are now, I think, with the economic diversification, we are moving towards more of execution and the implementation. And this is what we are working on as a second stage of this circular economy project.
So what's driving this? Is it just, policy direction, market pressure, or access to capital? Why all of a sudden, the...
Yeah, so we know that there is an environmental aspect of it, but for us really is the potential of the circular economy to contribute to the economic diversification, the job creation, the enablement of small, medium enterprises. We do really understand there is a huge potential out there. Personally, I started to meet with the small companies in Oman that deal with the circular economy initiatives, and they tell me there's a huge potential over there, and they are happy to see that the ministry is working on circular economy, and they are encouraging us to continue in this pathway and scale up the process. So this is why we also in the ministry, we are working on another project, which is enabling small, medium enterprises to help them, tap into circular economic opportunities that are in the country. But also, of course, we cannot think about it within Oman boundaries itself. We are also thinking about connecting the Omani market with the regional market and the global market, because we are not working in isolation. We are, with the circular economy, there's a supply and the demand aspect of it. So it is very important to understand the amount of the supply and the demand. And people who work in the market, they understand that we need to look regionally and also globally.
Great. That's a great point, to move on to you, you mentioned companies need to start taking this, seriously because it's going to affect them. If I'm a Omani SME listening to this podcast, I hear ESG, where do I even start? What are like the first 2 or 3 practical steps that I need to take to really move my ESG policy forward?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, but I think that the advice I give to SMEs is you don't have to go big from the first step. You know, you can start with small steps and build yourself up. I think the most important, like any good business decisions, is really understand what are the risks that you might be facing in the short term and medium term and long term. But also, let's look at some of the opportunities. I think SMEs have the opportunity, if they do sort of put that ESG lens on a lot of what they do, to create some differentiation for themselves, not just in local markets, but also potentially if they're looking externally into other regional or global markets. If they're exporting, they could actually differentiate their products and services with an ESG lens. So I think, again, E is the easiest piece that people can understand very quickly. So look at the costs, look at the risks associated with your energy, water, waste. Look at those things very closely, see how you can optimize them, see how you can perhaps innovate, re-engineer. And again, circular economy drives a lot of optimization thinking. And again, Oman's focus is brilliant because it's going to optimize the economy. It's going to make the economy more competitive. So apply that to an SME. If you start applying some of these principles around circularity or even ESG, it's going to make you more competitive. Can you do more for less costs in an energy efficient, effective way? Then let's explore it. So I think there are small tweaks you can look at. Even discussing some of the contracting around, your energy supply, water supply, waste. Speaking to your designers, can you look at redesigning things if you're an SME that focuses on developing widgets like things, items, products? Can you redesign so that's less packaging, less waste? Less packaging, less waste means less costs because you don't have to, pay as much for export fee, all that kind of stuff. It all plays out. I think it's important to make sure you have clear accountability for ESG, though. I think you could have KPIs per department depending on how big you are, but obviously SMEs are usually quite small, but making sure that someone owns it within the organisation, I think is really important. That
was my follow-up question. Once I have the data and I start measuring it, you mentioned in your earlier response that you usually push down to marketing or communication.
Yeah.
But who owns it so that they can be verified like financials?
Look, there's no right or wrong answer. I've always said that ESG should sit in the organisation where you think it will drive the most impact and the most value. So I do tend to say if you sit it in marketing, what message are you giving to your employees and to your other stakeholders in the market? If you don't see ESG as critically a strategic lever, then I think you need to go back and have a look again. So I personally would like to see it sitting in a strategy, a finance function. It can start in risk. Look, there's no problems where it's starting in risk because that's what people understand most before. Sometimes you need to go through that risk thinking before you get to the opportunity side. Don't forget, when you're looking at risk and you try to mitigate risk, you innovate. When you innovate, the opportunities become clear.
Absolutely. Just going back to, the economy, the sustainable investing is around 30 trillion US dollar right now, almost 30% of the global economy. So I'm going to ask this question two ways, from an investor or a policymaker perspective, and then from the bank's perspective. What do companies really need to show for them to move, towards sustainable investing?
Right. So I think with that in mind, the amount of sustainability investment today, and also because there are orientation from investors to really work with those who have more of transparency and accountability. So I think for both government and for companies to really show that they have identified the potential risks that they are exposed to, and they also need to show how they are capable in managing those risks. This helps the finance or the funders to know that these are more resilient in the long term compared to one who doesn't show those or who is not transparent. So for us in Oman, it is good for us that we identify that we are exposed to the climate change, we are impacted by it, but we also have plans to address the impacts of the climate change, both in terms of the mitigation and the adaptation. And we also have the initiatives on the ground. For example, the renewable energy target, now the circular economy initiatives, the hydrogen targets, and so on. So this is really gives like the outsider an insurance that they understand what they're doing, let's say. And this brings confidence, let's say, for the outsider to come and invest in the country. And when we speak also about sustainability, I also take it two ways. If I consider sustainability, then I have access to wider market. And if I don't consider it, then there are markets that I exclude. For example, I would say the European market is tightening the environmental standards like year after year with the CBAM and the corporate responsible sustainability. So it is, I have two pathways. Either like I continue to work with Europe, or I find another market. But what if I expose myself to both markets?
You mentioned CBAM. We'll come back to that later. But, Hanife, if I'm a company, from a bank's perspective, what do I need to show for you to, okay, this makes sense. I'm going to, provide funds for you.
So Development Bank is very focused and on sustainable finance and looking to fund and finance activities that support sustainability agenda, the Oman Vision, the Net Zero Commitment, and all the other, even the ministerial decisions, like in terms of the transport sector, what they're trying to do to decarbonise the transport sector, etc. So we want to play part of that. We have to. We're the People's Bank. We must support these commitments. We welcome any discussions for customers to come to us and put in front of us what their ideas are. And it can be at the very early stage. I've always said, we want to collaborate, want to work with you. You may not have the right setup or established the product or your loan requirements and what they are needed for may not be truly sustainable, but we can work with you to shift them and pivot them so that they meet the requirements around a sustainable finance criteria that we need. So one thing I think customers need to understand, or potential customers when they go to not just Development Bank, but any banks, so there are a few other commercial banks within Oman who are starting to focus on this as well, is that we all have a criteria we must meet. So first and foremost, we have to meet the financial fiduciary requirements of a loan. So we need to make sure that the project is bankable, that you have capacity to repay the debt, that all the other risks are taken into account. So that cannot change because we would lose our banking license if that happened. So that has to happen. At the same time, we also then, when we're trying to look at sustainable finance, they have to fit in certain criteria. Not everything is deemed sustainable. There are certain activities that are excluded. They're just not going to meet the criteria. And a lot of the criteria comes from international benchmarks. If you're looking for another benchmark, is the Ministry of Finance own sustainable finance framework. It's a good reference tool for anyone else looking at. There lists the activities that would meet sustainable finance criteria.
Yeah, so ESG, and for the benefit of our viewers, ESG, once you publish your report, you will be rated by a rating agency like MSCI, Sustainalytics, Bloomberg.
Yeah.
And your ESG rating actually affects your credit rating.
It can do.
Yeah, and which eventually would affect your cost of capital and your bottom line.
Correct.
Have you seen any companies practically lower their cost of capital because of a good ESG performance?
So I've seen it outside Oman. Definitely it happens. In Oman, it's starting to happen, very early days. What I will say is I know of a couple of banks who already price ESG risk. So, for example, if you're not managing ESG risk and you go to a bank, they're going to price that into the loan. So you may have to actually pay slightly more because your ESG performance is not strong. And the flip side is that I've also started to see them discount good ESG performance. So it's starting to happen. It's still very early days, but some of the audience listening will understand that CBO has put out a mandatory guidance around ESG, particularly on climate risk, that the banks all must follow, and that kicks in this year. So there are some of the milestones actually kick in at 1 July this year. So the banks are starting to really seriously embed climate risk assessment, but also the valuation piece in the pricing of loans and financing. So there are some instances.
So you see actual momentum in this area.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So back to you, Aisha. I mean, you mentioned the CBAM briefly in your previous response. Europe really now is, tightening the laws, forcing exporters into Europe to report embedded carbon. So for Omani exporters, what are the first concrete steps for them to remain competitive and be able to enter the European market?
Right. I think it's also good to have a definition of what CBAM. Maybe not everyone knows what CBAM is. It is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, where at the borders of the European continent, companies will be charged for the carbon content embedded in the imports. And then there is a methodology on how to account for that carbon content and also the charge of it. And so the idea also of the CBAM has started in Europe when Europe implemented the carbon pricing and the trading of the carbon within the EU. So it was kind of like an incentive for the companies not to move abroad where there is no or less environmental standards and invest abroad, but to stay in Europe, because if they go abroad and then they come back with the carbon content, then they will be charged. So that, I think, the basic idea. For us in Oman or in the region, the first step is, of course, like to understand where my exports are going or which exports are affected. It is cement, aluminum, petrochemicals, and the chemicals at an initial phase of the CBAM. These are the products that are affected. So what needs to happen, I think naturally for the company will look, do I export to Europe? If so, then I need to understand the carbon content in my products. And that goes back to everything, really, on the source of the energy that I use in running the company or the facility. Do I have greenhouse gas emission reduction target? Or do I have an overall sustainability strategy within the company that helps in reducing the carbon content in these products? So the first thing is the data and measuring the data, and I think the second thing is also to find ways in contributing in the decarbonization of the facility of a company. And in Oman, I think, again, I would say that we are naturally heading in that direction because we have Oman net zero target by 2050. So we are in the implementation strategy for that target, where every sector, they need to play their part in the decarbonization. But I would say like we are still in the initial stages. Maybe also another point that I would say we see that Europe is tightening those environmental standards, and maybe in Europe the companies are ready to adopt these changes. But abroad, I know it's not only in the Gulf, but also in Southeast Asia, the governments and the companies are asking to negotiate that kind of commitment in paying the price for the carbon. And I think this is also one of the steps that we need to consider in Oman and also in the Gulf.
Right. I mean, sometimes you open the news and you hear that a lot of companies are lobbying Europe to, relax their CBAM restrictions. Yes. For Omani exporters, Omani companies, you think they should let their, guard down, or should they stay the course and really try to lower their, carbon footprint?
I think we should stay the course and continue with lowering the carbon emissions, and also look for the new decarbonization opportunities, like through the implementation of renewable energy, enhancing the energy efficiency, or the use of the hydrogen. But at the same time, there is the readiness. Am I ready to pay the carbon tax at the borders? If not, maybe I need time for that, and this is where the negotiation part should happen.
Okay, I just want to go back to ESG. Same with CBAM. You open the news and you hear a lot of news about ESG being sidelined, not relevant anymore. Various countries around the world are kind of pushing it to the side. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we've been here before. I mean, it sort of goes in these waves. We've had countries withdraw from COP before, and, COP still continues. I think what countries and leaders of countries are seeing is that these catastrophic events are killing their people. And the cost of having to manage some of these catastrophic events is being borne by the governments. And the governments don't have endless supply of funds to manage some of these things. So again, if you want to make your country resilient, competitive, all those things, and protect your people, you have to look at some of this stuff regardless. The other thing that I think is really phenomenal and people need to really understand is, yes, there's all this noise that ESGs are fast, whatever. A lot of the terminology maybe didn't suit or position ESG properly. I mean, again, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, it's risk, it's opportunity. And often I think, we come up with these terms to make them easier to market, and maybe talking about risk and opportunity isn't so exciting, but I would say a lot of the discussions around ESG are being pushed into that business considerations and business language, which it should have been in the first place. The other thing too, pushing up against what's happening, is there are more climate laws in the world than there ever was before. I don't know the exact number, but there is a tracker. There's a website that tracks the number. But we now have more climate laws than we ever had before. And I know even in Oman, they're looking at developing a climate law. So you could say that, yes, maybe all the noise is saying ESG is dead, it's not important. But I think if you look at the actual facts and the evidence, it's still happening. I mean, again, if you want to be competitive, you drive circular economy to optimize your economy, to get rid of all the inefficiencies, to innovate. And if you don't do that, someone else is.
You mentioned something in one of your earlier responses. You said ESG kind of evolved from sustainability. Sustainability was kind of like a concept where you try to achieve harmony between the environment, the society, and the economy. Whereas now ESG are metrics, measurable metrics that kind of show how sustainable you really are. So before I move on to get your final thoughts, what do you think Oman needs to take? I know now the circular economy, policy is coming out, the benchmark is coming out. What do you think Oman's immediate short-term goals should be in the realm of ESG?
Right. I think building on the point of Hanife mentioned on the geopolitics of it, I think despite those geopolitics around ESG, I think the momentum is there for it. We moved from the concept into the implementation, and now the foundation for it is there. So despite it all, I think we should continue moving on that direction because the economic of scale for the technologies, for example, for renewable energy, for the energy efficiency, and also the global competition on that. Now we see, for example, China is dominating the clean energy market. So there is an economic aspect of it. It is not only environmental anymore, even if there is changes on the politics towards the environment. So I would say in Oman, immediate goal, I think we should continue with our, working on our strategies towards our environmental targets, the Oman Net Zero, renewable energy targets, and the energy efficiency. I think we should do more on that direction. On the ESG, I think it is not something that we are directly working on in the ministry at the moment, but maybe it's something to consider supporting Oman. But if I speak of the circular economy,
which is a pillar of ESG.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So what we actually are doing this year, we are working on a circular economy policy document that would help different segments of the society, from the government, the private, and the small, medium enterprises, as well as the individuals, to work together on achieving the objectives of the circular economy and to really tap onto the opportunities that we don't see in this actually field. So policy first, and the implementation as well.
Great. So any final thoughts?
Yes, I think to echo my earlier points is if you think this is not going to impact you, think again. And I encourage all Omani entities operating in the economy here to really think about ESG and how to embed it. I think Development Bank is committed to this. We have board support. We have great CEO support. We really want to be part of the solution. So we will continue to look at ways that we can finance the solutions around ESG, support our customers and potential customers in understanding and driving that ESG journey for them, because we know that not all of them will have the answer. I mean, if we were to ask our customers tomorrow, can you produce a greenhouse gas footprint, or tell us, how you manage your ESG risk, they will probably not have the answer. So it is our duty to also help our customers drive awareness, engage them, and build capacity for the future.
Great. Dr. Aisha, any thoughts from you?
For me, I think we do have the awareness on the ESG already in the country, even though we don't have a stringent policy or commitment towards it. In my role, I was invited by some organizations in Oman to contribute on the ESG competitions. So the organizations already understand it is not really an obligation, but there are also opportunities that comes with it. Opportunities in terms of the innovation, on the cost saving, and also on remaining resilient in the international market. One of the organizations that I attended, they show how they are creating the incentive for the green procurement. So because they are connected to the supply chain, and then they want to remain resilient, but also they realize if they implement circular economy concepts within the company, then they would have access to markets, and for some materials that are considered waste, they can actually gain value from that. And they have encouraged the employees to come with innovative ideas in that direction. So I think the awareness in Oman is there, and it is something that we should continue to build on moving forward.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. This was a very insightful discussion, and I'm sure our viewers will find it insightful as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to Tejarah Talks. Catch us on your favorite podcast platform for the latest Oman business insights and opportunities. Until next time, I'm Mohab Al Hinai. Stay curious.
Tejarah Talks.